Once, long ago, humanity had danced among the stars. Their ships carved through the black like knives. Their colonies bloomed on 1,000 worlds. They were known, they were feared, and most importantly, they were respected. But then came the fall. Not a war, not a disease, but something worse. A slow, creeping decay. They turned inwards, fighting over scraps, forgetting the stars they once ruled. One by one, their colonies went silent. Their homeworld, Earth, became a myth whispered among the stars, a dead rock abandoned by the children who had once loved it. The galaxy moved on without them. Empires rose and fell. Treaties were signed. Wars were waged. Humanity became a footnote in history, a memory no one bothered to fear anymore. The Iridians, a sleek reptilian race, ruled the central systems now. They saw themselves as the natural leaders of the galaxy, and why not? There was no one left to challenge them. The Grax, massive beasts wrapped in metallic armor, controlled the outer rims, and they too had long forgotten the pale-skinned, fragile creatures who once dared to defy them. In the minds of the powerful, humans were a ghost story, a race too weak to survive, too disorganized to matter. But they were wrong. It started with whispers, a cargo ship gone missing along the trade routes, a secret meeting of planetary governors ending with every delegate dead and no sign of the assassin. Entire pirate fleets wiped out without a single distress call. At first, the galaxy's rulers blamed each other. They thought the Grax were flexing their muscles. Maybe the Iridians were cleaning up the outer sectors. No one wanted to believe the truth. No one dared. On a backwater moon named Sarah 9, an old mining colony barely worth noticing, something different was happening. The miners, mostly a mix of smaller species long oppressed by the big empires, were being armed, trained, organized. At the center of it all was a man. He wore battered armor scavenged from a dozen worlds. His hair was dusted with gray, his face lined and hard. But his eyes burned. A deep, wild fire no other race could quite understand. His name was Captain Caleb Dre, and he was human. When the first Iridian patrol came to Sarah 9 to remind the miners of their place, they didn't even bring heavy weapons. They expected compliance. A few threats, a few public executions, and the problem would go away. They never even had time to scream. Captain Caleb Dre and his handful of rebels ambushed them at the spaceport, dismantling the patrol with brutal precision. Not flashy, not glorious, efficient, quick, human. The news spread fast, first through the mining worlds, then the mid-tier colonies. Whispers of a human uprising, a real one, not the scattered pockets of stubbornness that had always fizzled out. This was something organized. This was something dangerous. The Iridians laughed it off. A few soldiers missing on some dirtball planet? Hardly a threat. The Grax ignored it entirely. Humans were dead, weren't they? The Council of Dominants didn't even bother to meet over it. But Captain Caleb Dre wasn't interested in recognition. He wasn't fighting for headlines. He had a plan, and it was simple. Wake the galaxy up. Remind them who humanity was, and make them wish they had kept fearing humans all along. The next target was bigger, riskier. The weapons depot on Mykar's Reach wasn't just a storage facility. It was a symbol. It supplied half the Iridian fleet across the sector. Hitting it wasn't just sabotage. It was war. Captain Caleb Dre stood at the edge of the rocky outcrop overlooking the depot, the cold wind whipping his tattered cloak around his shoulders. Beside him crouched Rhea, a former miner from Sarah 9, with nerves of steel and a hatred for Iridians that burned brighter than the twin suns above them. "You sure about this?" she asked, adjusting the crude rifle in her hands. Caleb Dre didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on the glittering towers below. The neat rows of weaponized vehicles, the rhythmic patrols of Iridian soldiers, confident in their untouchable supremacy. "We don't have the luxury of being sure," he said finally. "We either strike now, or we die forgotten." Rhea grinned fiercely. "Then let's make sure they remember." The plan was simple because it had to be. They didn't have tanks, they didn't have warships. They had explosives cobbled together from mining charges, outdated rifles, and desperation. But desperation had a funny way of sharpening a blade. As the twin moons rose, Captain Caleb Dre and his small crew descended into the valley, moving like ghosts. They slipped through shadows, disabling cameras, taking out sentries with silent knives and quick, brutal moves. No flashy gunfire, no alarms, just the quiet, growing sense of dread creeping over the depot as the first fires broke out. When the explosives went off, it wasn't a single neat explosion. It was chaos. Towers crumbled, ammunition stores ignited in great roaring balls of fire. The ground shook as entire stockpiles of weapons vaporized in a single glorious instant. The few surviving Iridians tried to mount a defense, but they were disoriented, panicked. They weren't used to being attacked. They weren't used to fear. Caleb Dre watched from the ridge as the depot collapsed in flames, the fire reflecting in his hard, unblinking eyes. "Message sent," Rhea said beside him, panting from the sprint back up the hill. He nodded once. Not the message, the warning. They didn't stay to celebrate. Victory wasn't the goal. Survival was. And as they melted back into the wastelands, carrying what stolen supplies they could, Captain Caleb Dre knew that tonight wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, systems once loyal to the Iridians began to question. Why had the depot fallen? Who had the power, the audacity to strike so deep? Whispers turned into rumors, rumors into fear. And the one word carried by every frightened merchant, every spooked governor, every trembling informant was the same: humans. For the first time in centuries, that word didn't bring laughter. It brought silence. The Iridian High Council convened in secret, their sleek forms gathered around a grand obsidian table. They spoke in hurried, angry tones, too proud to admit what clawed at their minds. Commander Katal, the enforcer of the Mid-Rim, slammed his clawed fist onto the table, cracking the stone. "They're vermin," he snarled. "Scattered rats. I will personally crush this rebellion before it takes root." The Supreme Speaker narrowed his amber eyes. "You would do well not to underestimate rats, Katal. They have a way of gnawing through the strongest walls." For the first time in centuries, the mighty races of the galaxy felt a whisper of something they thought long dead. Not fear, not yet. Unease. And that was exactly what Captain Caleb Dre wanted. Because unease was the crack in the dam. And soon, the flood would come. Captain Caleb Dre didn't waste time. The galaxy was waking up, but not fast enough. Fear had to spread like a fire, outpacing reason before the powers that be could stamp it out. That meant more attacks. Bigger, bolder, louder. Their next move was pure madness, hijacking a Graxian dreadnought. The Grax were monsters in both size and reputation. Standing 3 meters tall with fists like wrecking balls and skin like living steel, they ruled the outer rims with brute force. Their dreadnoughts were more than ships. They were moving fortresses, each one capable of leveling planets. Stealing one? Insanity, which is why it was perfect. The Grax wouldn't see it coming. No one would. The plan began on Baeltor, a forgotten refueling station orbiting a dead star. The Grax dreadnought, Iron Maw, docked there for repairs. Its crew relaxed, arrogant, assuming no one would dare approach them. Captain Caleb Dre and his crew blended with the dock workers, wearing stolen uniforms and carrying falsified codes. They moved with the easy gait of the invisible. The people no one noticed, the ones who served but never mattered. Until they struck. It started with the engineering decks, small bombs rigged to critical systems, sabotage masked as mechanical failures. By the time the alarms started blaring, Caleb Dre and his strike team were already deep inside the ship. The corridors were chaos, Grax roaring orders, systems flashing warnings, emergency lights pulsing blood red, exactly as planned. Caleb Dre led his team straight to the bridge, cutting through surprised Grax soldiers with brutal, close-quarters precision. No firefights, no drawn-out battles. Humans had learned, you didn't beat strength with strength. You beat it with speed, with ruthlessness, with a willingness to do what the enemy thought impossible. Rhea took a plasma bolt to the shoulder but kept moving, her teeth gritted in grim defiance. Jax, their wiry tech expert, hacked into the ship's systems on the fly, rerouting controls, locking down blast doors, turning the dreadnought's own defenses against itself. When they reached the command throne, Caleb Dre didn't hesitate. The Graxian captain, a massive brute named Korvath, stood to meet him, snarling in disbelief. "Human?" Korvath spat the word like it was filth. Caleb Dre leveled his weapon calmly. "Surprised?" "You are ants!" Korvath roared, charging. Caleb Dre sidestepped, dodging the first swing that shattered a metal console. He fired point blank, not at Korvath's armored chest, but at his eyes. The plasma bolt seared through the Graxian's skull, dropping the beast mid-charge. Silence fell over the bridge. Caleb Dre holstered his weapon, turning slowly to face the terrified Grax crew, still alive. "This ship belongs to humanity now," he said, his voice cold, measured. "Spread the word." He let them flee. He wanted them to. Within hours, the Iron Maw lit up the comms across the sector, its stolen codes overriding every broadcast system. Captain Caleb Dre's face appeared. Grim, bloodied, alive. "We are the forgotten," he said. "We are the ghosts you laughed at, the ashes you thought scattered. You thought humanity was weak. You thought we were finished. You were wrong. Across 1,000 worlds, across every system and sector, beings of every race stopped what they were doing and listened. And for the first time in living memory, they heard a human voice declaring war. Caleb Dre's final words echoed through the stars. "We remember everything you did to us, and we are coming." Panic rippled through the galaxy. Trade routes were locked down. Armies were scrambled. The Iridians and Grax held emergency councils, blaming each other, pointing fingers. But deep down, they all knew the truth they didn't dare speak aloud. Humanity was back. And this time, they weren't playing by the old rules. The Iron Maw became more than just a stolen ship. It became a symbol, a moving nightmare for the old powers. Every time the dreadnought appeared on sensors, entire fleets scrambled and planets locked down, terrified of what would come next. But Captain Caleb Dre wasn't reckless. He didn't turn the dreadnought into a blunt instrument like the Grax had. He used it with precision, like a scalpel, striking where it would hurt the most. Supply depots, communication arrays, propaganda centers. Every attack was sharp, fast, and devastating, leaving systems in chaos and governments scrambling. In the shattered edges of the mid-rim territories, a legend began to grow. They called him the Revenant, the human who came back from the dead. Meanwhile, the Iridians and the Grax did what they always did when scared. They lashed out blindly. They doubled taxes on the minor species, arrested entire villages suspected of human collaboration, executed workers at the slightest hint of rebellion. In doing so, they made the fires of anger burn even hotter. Captain Caleb Dre understood something the empires had forgotten. Terror doesn't control people forever, not when they have nothing left to lose. Inside the bridge of the Iron Maw, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Rhea sat with her arms still in a sling, glaring at a holographic map displaying the next targets. Jax was bent over a console, muttering to himself as he reprogrammed the Dreadnought's stolen navigation systems. Caleb Dre stood at the helm, his arms crossed, surveying it all. "We're gaining momentum," Jax said without looking up. "Got a dozen colonies sending encrypted messages. They want to join us. Some are even offering fleets. Small ones, but still." "And the downside?" Caleb Dre asked, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Jax hesitated. "The Grax are pissed. Real pissed. Word is they've sent the blood pack after us." The room went silent. Even Rhea's confident smirk faded. The blood pack wasn't just another Grax fleet. They were specialists. Brutal, unrelenting, hunters trained to eradicate threats without mercy or hesitation. They didn't capture. They didn't negotiate. They exterminated. Caleb Dre's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. "Good. Let them come." Rhea gave a short bark of laughter. "You're insane, old man." "Probably," Caleb Dre said, allowing a rare, thin smile. "But that's what they're afraid of. We'll make it worse." He tapped the screen, marking a new target, the old prison moon of Zareth Prime. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't wealthy. It was forgotten. A dumping ground for political dissidents, rebels, and undesirables from a dozen conquered species. If they freed the prisoners there, it wouldn't just be a military win. It would be a spark, a raging, unstoppable wildfire. 3 days later, the Iron Maw dropped out of warp above Zareth Prime, engines growling low like a beast itching for a fight. The prison's defense systems, ancient and barely functional, tried to activate, but Jax disabled them with a few contemptuous keystrokes. Caleb Dre led the charge himself. They landed hard, boots kicking up the red dust of the prison yards. Alarms blared weakly from broken speakers as Caleb Dre, Rhea, and a small strike team cut through the guards with brutal clinical precision. The prisoners, gaunt, beaten, nearly broken, stared at them in disbelief. A tall, skeletal being with translucent skin stepped forward, eyes wide. You're human," it said, its voice trembling with something between fear and hope. Caleb Dre nodded once. "You want to fight?" A low murmur rose from the prisoners, first uncertainty, then anger, then a roar. Weapons were thrown into desperate hands. Chains were broken. Walls were torn down. By the time they left Zareth Prime, the prison was a smoking ruin, and 1,000 new soldiers followed them into the void, human and alien alike. Caleb Dre stood at the airlock, watching as the planet shrank away behind them. Rhea came to stand beside him, her face serious for once. "This is bigger than us now," she said. "It was always bigger than us," Caleb Dre replied quietly. "We're just the spark." Far off in the distance, sensors flashed. The blood pack had arrived. Massive ships, hulking silhouettes against the stars, bristling with weapons meant to annihilate. Caleb Dre turned to his crew, a fire in his chest that felt almost like joy. "Get ready," he said. Because now, it wasn't just humanity's fight. It was everyone's, and the galaxy was about to find out what happened when you pushed the Forgotten too far. The blood pack didn't waste time. The moment they dropped into orbit around Zareth Prime, they opened fire, hammering the surface with kinetic missiles and plasma bombardments. Dust and fire roared into the sky, blackening the stars above. The Iron Maw shook violently under the first barrage as Caleb Dre and his crew scrambled across the bridge. "Shields down to 60%!" Jax shouted over the alarms. "They're trying to pin us against the moon!" "They want to corner us," Rhea snarled, slamming a fresh power cell into her rifle. "Turn this ship into a tomb." Captain Caleb Dre didn't flinch. His mind raced, cold and sharp. The Blood Pack were bigger, stronger, and more heavily armed. Head on, they didn't stand a chance. Good. They didn't come here to fight fair. "Drop us into the debris field," Caleb Dre ordered. Jax blinked. "You serious? We could tear the hull apart. Better torn apart than blown apart. Do it!" Cursing under his breath, Jax wrestled the helm, forcing the Iron Maw into a steep dive, engines howling in protest. The ship plunged into the thick cloud of wreckage, the broken bones of old satellites, dead ships, shattered defense stations. Chunks of metal slammed into the hull, and the ship groaned like a dying animal. But the Blood Pack didn't follow. Not yet. They hesitated, wary of losing their technological advantage inside the deadly junk cloud. "Now," Caleb Dre growled, "we hunt." Inside the debris field, the Iron Maw became a ghost. Jax killed the main drives, letting the ship drift silently among the wreckage. They powered down weapons, dimmed lights, became part of the graveyard. Meanwhile, Rhea and a hand-picked boarding team suited up. They didn't plan to fight the Blood Pack ship to ship. That would be suicide. They planned to do something much more human. Get inside. Bleed them from within. One by one, stealth pods launched from the Iron Maw, barely detectable against the surrounding debris. The Grax ships, slow and overconfident, didn't even notice until it was too late. Caleb Dre himself led the assault. They breached the outer hulls of the Blood Pack ships with magnetic charges, slipping into the dark corridors beyond. Inside, it was pure chaos. The Grax were used to crushing opposition with overwhelming force. They weren't prepared for the brutal, silent fury of a human boarding party. They weren't ready for the quick knives in the dark, the scavenged explosives hidden inside power cores, the precision strikes against vital systems. It wasn't war, it was slaughter. Caleb Dre moved like a shadow through the enemy ship, carving a path of destruction. He planted charges on reactor cores, sabotaged life support, tore through command decks before the enemy even knew where to shoot. He made them bleed. When the first Blood Pack cruiser exploded from within, the others panicked. They fired blindly into the debris field, hitting each other as much as the wreckage around them. Their discipline shattered, their formation broke, and the Iron Maw struck. Engines roaring back to life, the stolen dreadnought surged out of the debris field, weapons blazing. Torpedoes slammed into the flanks of the remaining ships, ripping open metal like paper. Plasma cannons sliced through armor, punching holes the size of buildings into the enemy cruisers. What was supposed to be a clean extermination became a massacre, but not the one the Grax intended. It was over in less than an hour. The Blood Pack, feared across the galaxy, were annihilated. Their wreckage drifted silently through space, burning and broken. On the bridge of the Iron Maw, the crew sat in stunned silence, panting, bleeding, alive. Caleb Dre leaned heavily against the railing, his chest heaving. Blood dripped from a shallow cut across his temple, but his eyes blazed. "We did it," Rhea breathed, looking around in disbelief. We beat them." Caleb Dre pushed himself upright. His voice was raw but steady. "This was never about beating them," he said. "This was about sending a message." He turned toward the cracked viewport, watching the fires spread across the stars. "Tell the galaxy," he said. "The hunters have become the hunted. Across the fractured colonies, across the enslaved worlds, across every hidden corner where hope had once died. The news spread like wildfire. The Blood Pack was dead, and humanity was alive. Not just alive, rising. The empires, once so certain of their rule, realized something terrible and true. They hadn't just forgotten humanity. They had underestimated them. And that mistake was going to cost them everything. The galaxy didn't know how to react. For centuries, strength had belonged to the Iridians, the Grax, and the few other dominant species who carved up star systems like property deeds. Fear was a tool they wielded as easily as a blade. But now? Now fear had changed sides. News of the Blood Pack's destruction shattered whatever illusion of control the old empires had left. On every world, from the rich core planets to the forgotten mining moons, small acts of rebellion exploded overnight. Worker riots, sabotaged garrisons, entire colonies declaring independence, and everywhere, woven through every desperate transmission, one name kept surfacing: humanity. On the political capital of Vrelas Prime, the Iridian High Council met under full emergency lockdown. The great halls, once glittering with arrogance and pride, now reeked of panic. Supreme Speaker Vikor slammed a clawed hand onto the central table. "We cannot allow this infection to spread." Across from him, Admiral Scythar, once proud, now visibly aged from the stress, bared his fangs. "Half our fleets are tied up putting down revolts. Our colonies are bleeding resources. If we overcommit, the Grax will seize our territories." The words hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just humans anymore. The whole galaxy was teetering, drunk on the first real taste of freedom in generations. And no one, not the Iridians, not the Grax, not the bureaucratic worms that ruled from gilded thrones, had the strength to hold it back. Meanwhile, on the Iron Maw, Captain Caleb Dre stood before a growing army: humans, aliens, former slaves, miners, mercenaries, exiled governors, even deserters from the Iridian fleets, anyone with a grudge and a gun. The docking bay was packed, the air buzzing with raw, electric anger. Caleb Dre didn't give speeches often. He wasn't a politician. He was a reminder, a ghost of humanity's brutal, unstoppable will. He stepped onto a crate, rough and blood-stained, and let his voice carry through the bay. "They forgot about us," he began, his voice low and hard. "They laughed when we fell. They buried us under their laws, their taxes, their boots. They fed on our weakness, thinking it made them strong." He looked out over the crowd, faces bruised, scarred, but burning with the same fire that roared in his own chest. They were wrong. A roar went up, deep and ragged. Caleb Dre raised a fist. "We are not here to beg. We are not here to ask. We are here to take back what they stole." Another shout, louder now. He leaned forward, voice sharp as a blade. "Every broken world, every stolen life, every forgotten name." He let the silence stretch, taut and heavy. "They will remember us, and they will fear us." The bay exploded into a deafening roar. Jax grinned from his post at the side, nudging Rhea. "Told you he'd start a war with words alone?" Rhea only smiled grimly, checking her rifle. "Words are nice. Bullets are better." Outside the Iron Maw, the fleet grew. It wasn't polished or pretty. A patchwork of stolen freighters, retrofitted mining rigs, ancient corvettes held together by hope and duct tape. But it was real. And for the first time in living memory, it flew under a human banner. Not the old polished insignias of the fallen Terran Empire. Something simpler. A tattered black flag. One word painted across it in blood-red letters. Remember. And across the stars, in the secret rooms where cowards plotted and tyrants schemed, the fear they had once wielded like a weapon began to twist against them. Because it's easy to rule the desperate. It's easy to crush the broken. But when you push the forgotten too far, when you treat memory like dust, you don't just lose power, you get dragged into the fire. And Captain Caleb Dre was ready to set the whole galaxy ablaze. The first empire to truly fall wasn't the Grax. It wasn't even the Iridians. It was the Vile Syndicate, a slimy cartel that had thrived by selling out weaker species to the highest bidder. They ruled a dozen systems with an iron fist and a network of mercenaries and assassins. or at least they used to. Captain Caleb Dre targeted them first for one reason. They had forgotten fear entirely. The syndicate leaders laughed when news of the human fleet spread. They mocked the rebellion on their secure channels, calling them scraps and ghosts. They bragged that their assassins would cut out Caleb Dre's heart and serve it on a silver plate. They didn't understand. This wasn't rebellion. It was a reckoning. It started with the siege of Talos III, the Syndicate's pride and joy, a fortress world, heavily fortified, surrounded by defense satellites and orbital mines. Caleb Dre didn't order a traditional assault. He didn't have the patience for that kind of slow bleed. Instead, he unleashed terror. The Iron Maw warped in under a sensor shadow, so close to the planet's atmosphere that it rattled from turbulence. Behind it came a fleet of ragged ships, barely space-worthy, patched with stolen parts, painted with defiant slogans in every language imaginable. They didn't follow standard battle formations. They didn't issue warnings. They didn't negotiate. The fleet descended like wolves onto Talos III, blasting through defense grids with ruthless efficiency. Teams of human and alien commandos rained down onto the surface, using retrofitted mining pods to punch through defenses like missiles. The Syndicate's elite guards fought back, of course, but they fought the way privileged men always fought, hiding behind walls, trusting in armor and status. Caleb Dre's people fought differently. They fought like those who had nothing left to lose. They fought like monsters. Rhea led the ground assault, her arms still stiff from old wounds but her aim deadly as ever. She moved through the Syndicate strongholds with merciless precision, leaving a trail of bodies behind her. Jax, meanwhile, hacked into the planet's communication grid, broadcasting Captain Caleb Dre's voice on every frequency. Talos III is falling. Your leaders have abandoned you. Lay down your arms, join us, or be forgotten. It wasn't just a bluff. When the first Syndicate mercenary crews defected, throwing down their weapons, pledging loyalty to the new banner, the tide turned fast. By the third day, the Syndicate's remaining forces barricaded themselves inside their central fortress, a sprawling black citadel carved into the side of a mountain. Caleb Dre stood at the foot of the great gates, surrounded by his growing army. He didn't send emissaries. He didn't offer terms. He simply raised his rifle, aimed at the massive iron doors, and fired the first shot. The final battle for Talos III was ugly, brutal, and short. When it was done, the fortress was a smoking ruin. The Syndicate lords, once fat and powerful, were dragged into the open in chains, their jeweled robes stained with blood and ash. Caleb Dre stood before them, his face expressionless. "You sold your own people for profit," he said. "You forgot what fear was." One of the lords, a bloated creature with 7 eyes and a golden tongue, tried to bluster, tried to offer riches, bribes, information. Caleb Dre shot him between the eyes without a word. The others didn't beg after that. The Veil Syndicate collapsed overnight. Systems once chained by debt and fear rose up, seizing power, throwing off the yoke of slavery, and on every liberated world, the black flag of remember was raised. Not because Caleb Dre demanded it, because the people chose it, because across the galaxy, the message was clear. If you had suffered, if you had been forgotten, if you had been crushed, there was a place for you under the human banner. But it wasn't all victory. Not all battles were bloodless. As Caleb Dre stood in the ruins of the fortress, watching prisoners being loaded onto transports, Rhea approached him quietly. "We lost 2 ships in orbit," she said. "Good people." Caleb Dre didn't flinch. Loss was a given. It soaked into his bones like old scars. "They knew the cost," he said. "And now the galaxy knows ours. Because the dream wasn't peace. It wasn't freedom. It was vengeance, raw and burning, and the empires were starting to realize there was no treaty, no deal, no surrender that would save them. Only the ashes would remain. The galaxy was burning. It started in the outer colonies, then the mid-rim worlds, and now it was racing toward the core, like a wildfire through dry grass. Systems that had never known rebellion were toppling overnight. Armies that once crushed uprisings with a flick of a wrist were losing ground to mobs with stolen rifles and makeshift warships. The name Captain Caleb Dre was no longer whispered in fear. It was chanted. It was roared across battlefields and blasted across seized comm towers. On Vrelas Prime, the jewel of the Iridian Empire, the streets boiled with revolt. Statues of long-dead tyrants toppled. Grand halls where treaties had been signed in blood now burned with the fires of justice. Captain Caleb Dre didn't lead every fight. He didn't have to anymore. He had become something bigger than a man. He was a symbol of a truth too terrible for the old empires to accept. Humanity had survived. Humanity had remembered. And now, humanity was teaching the galaxy what it meant to be feared. On board the Iron Maw, Caleb Dre stood alone in the command bay, staring out at the chaos of Vrelas Prime's orbit. The Iridian's fleet, once the terror of the stars, was shattered. Ships drifted like corpses through space, fires eating their hulls, escape pods scattering like insects. Behind him, Rhea approached, armor scorched, helmet tucked under one arm. "We took the High Council chambers," she reported. "It's done." Caleb Dre didn't turn to look at her. "They surrender?" Rhea hesitated. "They begged?" A long, cold silence settled between them. Caleb Dre nodded once. Good. He had no mercy left to give. Jax appeared next, blood on his uniform, a triumphant grin on his face. "We control the broadcast network," he said. "You're live to every system still listening." Caleb Dre turned slowly, the weight of 1,000 dead worlds heavy on his shoulders. He stepped toward the comm station, placed his hands on the console, and leaned in close. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, and final. "This is Captain Caleb Dre of humanity," he said. "You forgot us. You erased us from your histories. You called us weak, savage, broken." He paused, letting the words sink into every trembling heart across the stars. "You were wrong." Images flashed across every screen in the galaxy. The fall of Talos III, the wreckage of the Blood Pack, the black flag of Remember rising over Vrelas Prime. "We are not your slaves. We are not your footnotes. We are the storm you thought would never come." He leaned back, staring into the endless dark between the stars. "And we are not done." Across the galaxy, planets surrendered before a shot could be fired. Others fought and were ground into dust. Caleb Dre didn't seek out peace talks. He didn't seat himself at diplomatic tables. He left that for others, new leaders rising from the ashes. He had a different task. One last task. The Grax homeworld. The monstrous race that had enslaved billions, had burned human colonies to ash, had laughed the loudest when Earth fell. Caleb Dre would not let them go quietly. The fleet massed around the Iron Maw, a tattered armada stitched from the bones of a dozen fallen empires. Humans, aliens, even former enemies stood side by side, not under a flag of diplomacy, under a flag of vengeance. As they approached Grax Dratha, the once mighty homeworld, the skies filled with enemy ships. The Grax had fortified their world, ready for the final stand. They wanted to make humanity bleed one last time, and Caleb Dre was more than willing to oblige. The final battle was cataclysmic. Starships collided, burned, tore each other apart with brutal savagery. Ground assaults ravaged the surface, cities crumbling under the weight of bombs and boots. The Grax fought like the monsters they were. but they had forgotten one simple truth. Nothing fights harder than the forgotten. Captain Caleb Dre led the charge himself, boots pounding the ruined streets of their capital, rifle flashing fire and death. When the last Grax warlord fell, choking on his own blood, Caleb Dre stood atop the shattered remains of the enemy palace. The black flag was raised behind him, torn and scorched but unbroken. The galaxy watched in silence. They would not forget humanity again, because humanity had returned, not to beg for a place among the stars, not to ask for forgiveness, but to take what was owed in blood, fire, and memory. And Captain Caleb Dre? He simply turned away from the wreckage, his voice low and certain as he spoke to the stars. We were forgotten once. Never again. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Confederation glittered under 100,000 artificial stars. Representatives from every major species filled the massive amphitheater, their voices buzzing in 1,000 languages, 1,000 worries. And yet, there was one seat that held more weight than the rest. The human delegation. Ambassador Elaine Carter sat stiffly at the long obsidian table, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. Her suit, tailored for power, fit her like armor. Beside her sat General Marcus Vane, the human military's representative, broad-shouldered and quiet, his face unreadable. Both of them had heard the whispers, the mocking tones slipping from the other delegates when they thought humans couldn't hear. The humans are weak. The humans are emotional. They won't dare to start a war. Elaine clenched her jaw. They had come here to talk peace after the Brask uprising, to mend wounds the Confederation had inflicted. After decades of loyalty, humanity had been betrayed, stabbed in the back during the skirmishes on Taraxis IV. Their colonies had been left undefended. Their civilians had been slaughtered. And now, the Confederation wanted to negotiate without even offering an apology. A chime sounded across the hall. President Vaylor of the Confederation, a shimmering serpent-like creature from the Velari race, floated to the central podium. His translucent skin shimmered with self-importance as he began to speak. "Esteemed members," he said, his voice slick as oil, "we gather to extend our olive branch to humanity. Let us move past misunderstandings." Elaine's fingers twitched. Misunderstandings? The bodies buried under the rubble of New Geneva would call it something else. Massacre, betrayal, cowardice. General Vane leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "They're playing us for fools." She didn't need the reminder. The Velari continued, "It would be unfortunate if humanity chose to escalate matters. After all, no species thrives alone." The room filled with polite chuckles. Not from the humans. Elaine stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the obsidian floor. Every head turned. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Ambassador Carter of Earth speaking," she announced. "We came in good faith. We buried our dead, rebuilt our homes, and believed that justice would prevail. Instead, we find mockery." The hall grew still. No one expected the humans to call it out. No one expected them to be angry. Elaine continued, her voice gathering strength. "We are not here to beg for scraps of dignity. We are not here to forget the innocent lives lost for the sake of your politics." President Vaylor's face tightened. He tried to cut in, but she raised her hand, silencing him. "You took our trust," she said, her voice now low and dangerous, "and spat on it. You believe our humanity is a weakness. You think because we grieve, because we hope, that we won't fight. You are wrong." General Vane stood up beside her. Across the hall, a few more humans, scientists, diplomats, soldiers, rose too. A slow, deliberate movement. "We hereby withdraw from the Confederation peace talks," Elaine declared. "Effective immediately." Gasps echoed from every corner of the room. The Valari president looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You cannot simply—" he began. "We can," Marcus Vane interrupted, his voice a gravelly growl. "And we will." With mechanical precision, the human delegation turned and walked away. Their boots thudded against the polished floor like war drums. The other species watched, frozen, some with disbelief, some with fear, because deep down they remembered what humanity was capable of when it was cornered. They remembered Earth's wars, Earth's survival, Earth's unbreakable spirit. They realized too late that they hadn't insulted a fragile species. They had poked a beast, and now that beast was walking away, teeth bared and patience gone. The humans didn't just walk out of the hall. They walked out of the Confederation itself. The human ships waiting in orbit received the message within minutes. Without hesitation, the massive fleet turned away from the diplomatic stations and headed back toward Earth space. No posturing, no warnings, just a cold, silent withdrawal. Within hours, the Confederation's private communications channels exploded in panic. Some called for emergency meetings, others demanded sanctions. A few, the wiser few, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was already too late. On the bridge of the UHS Resolute, Admiral Kira Monroe watched the starfield shift as the ship jumped into hyperspace. She had been briefed on the situation minutes before the withdrawal. Her orders were simple. Return home. Prepare. "Set course for Sol Prime," she said, her voice calm, but inside she felt the fire building. Humanity had played nice for too long. They had been the peacekeepers, the bridge builders, the idealists. No more. As the Resolute sped through the slipstream, Kira opened the classified files that had been quietly distributed to every human warship in the fleet. Projects that had been kept secret even from most Confederation allies. Weapons humanity had never needed, or never dared to use. Until now. Back at the Confederation Central Command, chaos brewed behind gilded walls. A crisis council had been called. No cameras, no public announcements. Just fear, thick and clinging to every corner of the marble chamber. President Vaylor paced in front of his aides. "We underestimated them," he admitted, his scales flickering darkly. "They are emotional, but emotion drives them. It fuels them." Admiral Exthar of the Brask, a hulking insectoid creature, shifted uneasily. "They've always been dangerous, even during peace. They expanded faster than any race, innovated faster, fought harder." "And now?" asked Councillor Mirren of the Lithari, a species known for their cold logic. "Now, we have given them every reason to become our enemies." Vaylor slumped into his seat. "We must find a way to contain them before they retaliate. Retaliate." The word hung in the air, heavier than gravity. Because deep in their shared history books, they all remembered Earth's darkest moments. They remembered the Terran Wars, when humanity had nearly torn itself apart, and somehow survived. They remembered the Scourge campaigns, where humans had faced extinction-level events and clawed their way back from oblivion. They remembered that humans didn't just fight wars. They became wars. Back on Earth, news of the peace talk breakdown spread like wildfire. Governments united overnight. Factories that had been idle since the last interstellar treaty roared back to life. Sleeper fleets hidden on the dark side of moons reactivated. Ancient war protocols, once locked away as relics of a violent past, flashed back to operational status. And the people? The people didn't panic. They prepared. They remembered the videos of their burned colonies. They remembered the smug faces of alien diplomats offering hollow apologies. And they remembered, in the marrow of their bones, that humanity had always survived by doing the one thing they did better than any other species: getting angry. Elaine Carter watched from the observation deck of the human command ship, her hands resting lightly on the railing as she stared into the swirling colors of hyperspace. "This isn't revenge," she said quietly to herself. "It's survival." And far across the stars, where petty politicians still argued over treaties and reparations, somewhere deep inside every alien heart that had laughed at humanity's pain, a cold, creeping fear began to grow. They had not seen humanity's wrath yet, but they would, soon. The first blow wasn't loud. It didn't come with a grand fleet tearing across the stars or a declaration of war broadcasted to the galaxy. It came in silence. Confederation trade routes, once bustling highways of goods and diplomacy, started collapsing one by one. Ships found their systems hacked mid-jump, their navigation scrambled by viruses so advanced even the Lithari couldn't untangle them. Cargo vanished, supplies dried up, whole sectors went dark, isolated by invisible hands, and not a single human ship was seen. On Taraxis 5, a Valari mining outpost reported a sudden drop in power levels. Before they could send a distress call, their reactors overloaded and shorted out. No explosions, no casualties, just a blackout that left them stranded, shivering under the cold stars. The humans weren't fighting with guns. They were fighting with brilliance, precision, ruthlessness. Back on Earth, General Marcus Vane stood before a room full of military commanders, scientists, and political leaders. The room was dark, illuminated only by a giant holographic map of the galaxy with key Confederation systems marked in red. "We're not waging war," he said, his voice even. "We're teaching them fear." He pointed at the map, and system after system began blinking, a pattern emerging that only a human mind could truly appreciate. "We will make them doubt every light they see in the sky," he continued, "every transmission, every promise of safety. We'll remind them why humanity was always considered too dangerous to truly trust." Admiral Monroe stepped forward. "Phase 2 is ready, sir." Marcus nodded once. "Begin." Meanwhile, at the Confederation High Command, the leaders were unraveling. "Entire sectors are reporting technical failures," Admiral Exthar hissed, his wings twitching furiously. "Our ships won't jump. Our communication buoys are offline." "It's sabotage," Mirren said, her tone sharp with alarm. "Coordinated. Deliberate." President Vaylor clutched his head, the gleam of his skin dimming with stress. "They're destabilizing our entire infrastructure without firing a single shot. How is this possible?" An underling scurried forward, trembling. "Sir, we've intercepted fragments of code left in the wreckage of the navigation relays. It's human. Old human." "Old?" Vaylor snapped. "Yes, sir," the aide said, swallowing hard. "Pre-Confederation era, military grade. It's brutal. No fail-safes. It doesn't just disrupt systems. It teaches them to self-destruct." The room fell into a sickening silence. Old human warfare wasn't elegant. It was raw, merciless, designed in an era when survival meant annihilating threats completely. The Confederation had forgotten that part of humanity, but humanity hadn't. In a desperate attempt to save face, the Confederation ordered a peace envoy, an emergency delegation of diplomats, soldiers, and scholars, to travel to Earth and offer formal reparations. The humans received the request and ignored it. Days passed, weeks. The Confederation began losing border colonies to chaos. Minor species that had once relied on the Confederation for protection now found themselves vulnerable and angry. Pirates, warlords, and rebel cells sprang up like weeds, emboldened by the sudden collapse of law and order. The Confederation was rotting from the inside, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. Still no human fleets. Still no mass invasions. Just silence. And fear. Elaine Carter watched the reports from the command deck of the UHS Dominion. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, calm and steady. "How long until they break?" she asked, not turning. General Vane, standing beside her, answered without hesitation. "They're already broken. They just don't know it yet." She nodded, her voice as cold as space itself. "Then it's time they learned." In the vast emptiness between the stars, humanity waited, not for permission, not for forgiveness, but for the perfect moment to strike the final blow. And this time, when it came, the galaxy would have no warning, no second chance, just the raw, unstoppable fury of a species that had been mocked, wounded, and now fully awake. The first true strike hit the Confederation core worlds like a hammer. It wasn't missiles or bombs, it was worse. At exactly 200 hours Confederation Central Time, every major financial hub across 27 inhabited planets collapsed. Bank accounts were wiped clean, corporate systems melted under precision data attacks, power grids overloaded, trade fleets lost all command signals and drifted helplessly. The Confederation's heart didn't just skip a beat, it flatlined. News feeds, once carefully controlled to project stability, couldn't hide the chaos anymore. Footage leaked, panicked citizens looting supply centers, military officers abandoning posts, planets declaring independence overnight. And through it all, not a single human soldier had stepped onto a Confederation world. On Earth, in a war room buried deep beneath the mountains, Elaine Carter stood before a quiet, waiting crowd. "Our goal was never conquest," she said. "It was respect." The men and women in the room, hardened commanders, strategists, and survivors of 100 broken treaties, nodded grimly. "They had their chance at peace," she continued. "They chose arrogance. They chose betrayal." She turned toward General Vane, who was already keying in the next phase. "Now," she said, voice like iron, "they will learn humility." Above the ruined economies of the Confederation, new signals began to broadcast from seemingly nowhere. Human-made satellites, hidden, cloaked, and buried deep within neutral space, sprang to life, pushing a single message across every channel, in every language. "You should have remembered what we are. Now you will." Confederation leaders scrambled to respond. Emergency councils were called, new treaties drafted. They begged, pleaded, offered resources, planets, even tribute. But humanity didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, human science vessels arrived at neutral colonies, not with weapons, but with aid. Medicine, food, clean water, technology, all free. No demands, no political posturing. The colonies, abandoned by the Confederation, welcomed the humans with open arms. It wasn't just a war of bombs anymore. It was a war of hearts. Confederation loyalists screamed betrayal. Neutral systems called it salvation. And the cracks in the once mighty Confederation turned into gaping wounds. At the Confederation High Command, panic had twisted into something worse. Despair. "They're winning the outer systems," Admiral Exthar said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "without firing a shot." President Vaylor leaned heavily against the command table, his skin so dim it looked almost gray. "We tried to control them," he rasped. "Now we have nothing left to offer but surrender." "And would they even accept it?" Mirren asked bitterly. "After what we did?" No one answered. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity had outgrown them. They had thought the humans were children, wild, emotional, reckless. They hadn't realized that the humans were something else entirely. Survivors. Builders. And when provoked, destroyers. On the bridge of the Dominion, Elaine watched the newest reports flow in, worlds flipping allegiance, Confederation fleets defecting, unwilling to die for a government that had already abandoned them. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "They're ready," General Vane said beside her. Elaine nodded. "Then it's time to make them an offer." "Terms of surrender?" he asked. "No," she said, her eyes burning. "Terms of existence." Because this was no longer about justice. This was about reshaping the galaxy itself. And humanity wasn't going to ask for a seat at the table anymore. They were going to build a new one, on the ruins of everything that had dared to betray them. The message went out across every surviving Confederation channel, cutting into broadcasts, overriding local networks, flashing onto every screen from the core worlds to the edge of explored space. It was simple, ruthless, unmistakably human. A single black screen, white text, burning bright. The Confederation is dead. A new order is coming. You have one choice. Join us or be forgotten. There were no negotiations, no second offers, no smiling diplomats. The galaxy, which once thought itself mighty, was now on its knees before a species it had spent centuries underestimating. On Earth, the United Human Council, newly formed, united for the first time in history without internal factions, watched the responses pour in. Outlying planets rushed to pledge allegiance, desperate for protection. Former allies of the Confederation scrambled to declare neutrality or beg forgiveness. Even some high-ranking Confederation officials quietly sent offers to defect, to serve, to survive. And the core Confederation worlds? They hesitated. They still believed, in their arrogance, that humanity would allow them to bargain. Elaine Carter leaned forward over the conference table, her hands steepled under her chin. "Hit them," she ordered, cold and final. No hesitation. Within minutes, coordinated human strike teams, cybernetic specialists, orbital skirmishers, stealth fleets, descended like phantoms on the remaining Confederation strongholds. No cities were bombed. No civilian populations were slaughtered. Instead, command centers blinked off the grid. Military installations found their targeting systems turned against them. Key government officials simply disappeared. One by one, the Confederation's last pillars crumbled to dust. At Confederation High Command, President Vaylor watched the final reports trickle in, his body sagging under the weight of realization. "We should have feared them," he whispered. Beside him, Miren closed her many eyes, her voice a hollow shell of what it once was. "We mocked them for being ruled by emotion. We forgot that rage is an emotion too." Across the galaxy, planets lit their skies with new banners, black and silver, emblazoned with the sigil of humanity. Not a symbol of conquest, a symbol of survival. A warning to every species who thought mercy was weakness, a promise that Earth would never bow again. On the bridge of the UHS Dominion, Elaine Carter stood watching the stars drift by. General Marcus Vane came to stand beside her, handing her a tablet displaying the full surrender of the last Confederation stronghold. "We've won," he said. Elaine didn't smile, didn't cheer. She just stared into the dark, endless night. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "It's just the beginning. Because humans weren't just survivors anymore. They were the architects of a new era, an era born from betrayal, forged in rage, tempered by loss, an era where no one would ever dare to underestimate them again. From that day forward, across every corner of the galaxy, two unspoken truths would reign. Never betray a human. Never corner a beast. And humanity, once mocked for their fragile emotions, now ruled with an iron will that no force could ever break. In the months that followed the Confederation's fall, the galaxy changed in ways no one could have predicted. Human patrol fleets now swept across the star lanes, not as invaders, but as enforcers. Piracy plummeted to near extinction. Trade resumed between worlds that had been left to rot by the old Confederation. Diseases that had ravaged colonies for decades were wiped out within weeks. thanks to human medical breakthroughs that had once been hidden away, hoarded by corrupt Confederation councils. For many, life actually became better, safer. But beneath the order, something darker simmered. Humanity hadn't just stepped into the Confederation's shoes. They'd burned the shoes, scattered the ashes, and built boots of their own. Boots meant for marching, not for diplomacy. The Human Council called it the stabilization. A galaxy rebuilt under humanity's protection, yes, but also under humanity's watchful, unforgiving gaze. Every planetary governor, every corporate magnate, every fleet admiral was hand-picked, approved by Earth command centers and vetted for loyalty to the new order. Freedom still existed, but it had tight borders now. Justice was swift, and mercy was rationed. In the shadows of shining cities and prosperous colonies, resentment began to grow. Small at first, quiet, but real. On the mining world of Rysar 3, a group of alien workers whispered in hidden tunnels. They spoke of human arrogance, of betrayal. They remembered promises of partnership that now looked more like domination. On the agricultural moon of Lystra, a Lithari elder watched human engineers optimize their sacred fields, turning ancient traditions into efficient, soulless farming grids. She smiled at the soldiers and nodded at the officials. But in her heart, she buried a seed of hate. And on the old ruins of Taraxis 4, where so much human blood had been spilled during the Brask betrayal, something worse stirred. Not resentment, not whispers, plans. Human intelligence agencies, far sharper now than the Confederation's bloated bureaucracies, picked up traces. Words caught in intercepted messages. Rebellion, restoration, revenge. General Marcus Vane sat with Elaine Carter in the Situation Room, deep inside Earth's fortified command complex. Reports filled the holographic table between them, unrest growing like cracks in ice. "They're ungrateful," Marcus said, his voice low and full of iron. "We saved them. They owe us." Elaine didn't answer immediately. She stared at a slow-spinning map of the galaxy, dots blinking where incidents of sabotage, protests, and low-level terrorism had been recorded. Finally, she said, "No species likes being ruled, even by those who save them." Marcus snorted. "We gave them security, and took their pride," she replied. He studied her, frowning. "You don't regret what we did, do you?" She met his gaze, steady as the pull of gravity. "Number 8 was necessary. But don't mistake survival for loyalty, Marcus. They will rise against us eventually." "And when they do?" he asked. Elaine's smile was cold, almost pitying. "We'll remind them. Again." Across the stars, the human dominion, as the galaxy had come to call it, tightened its grip. But cracks were appearing. Small alliances formed between races that had once despised each other, bonded now by a common fear of their human rulers. Secret gatherings discussed ancient weapons, lost technologies, hidden systems untouched by human hands. They spoke of patience, of striking when the beast grew comfortable, when it forgot that fear could be a double-edged sword. But humanity had survived worse. They had clawed their way back from worse betrayals, deeper wounds. And Earth itself? It had become something new, not just a planet, but a fortress. Layers of defenses wrapped it like armor. Orbital rings bristled with cannons that could slice a fleet in half. 1,000 sleeper ships, hidden in deep space, stood ready to strike at any uprising. The galaxy thought it could wait for humanity to grow weak. It didn't realize humanity had been forged by waiting, by enduring, by preparing. On the observation deck of the UHS Dominion, Elaine Carter watched Earth spinning below, beautiful, terrible, unbreakable. "This is peace," she said softly. Beside her, Marcus Vane crossed his arms. "Until it's not." And somewhere, in the deep cold between stars, seeds of rebellion cracked open, unaware that they weren't sowing freedom. They were sowing their own destruction. Again. It started with a whisper on Listra Moon. A shipment bound for a human outpost vanished in transit. No distress call, no wreckage, just an empty shipping lane where a freighter used to be. At first, Command assumed it was pirates. After all, small-time raiders still prowled the edges of space. But then another freighter disappeared. And a third. Within a month, entire convoys were being picked off in deep space, their signals scrambled, their escorts bypassed, as if the enemy knew exactly where to hit. General Marcus Vane reviewed the footage personally. What he saw made his blood run cold. Highly coordinated attacks, executed with brutal efficiency. Whoever was behind this wasn't improvising. They were organized, trained. They had been preparing. "We underestimated them," he admitted to Elaine Carter in a rare moment of frustration. "We thought they were scattered, broken." Elaine sat at the head of the council table, fingers drumming lightly against the polished steel. Around her, holograms floated. Reports of sabotage, uprisings, even assassinations of human officials in distant systems. "They're not trying to defeat us," she said, her voice low. "They're trying to make us bleed." And they were succeeding. Human supply lines stretched thin across the stars, trying to hold the fragile new order together. Every attack chipped away at morale, at control, at the image of invincibility humanity had built so carefully. On the mining world of Rysar 3, a rebel broadcast pierced through human jamming fields for the first time. Grainy footage showed alien workers raising banners, not Confederation banners, but a new symbol, a black circle broken by a silver lightning bolt, the symbol of resistance. The message was short, defiant. We remember, we endure, we rise. Across the Dominion, other systems stirred. Planets that had accepted human aid began questioning the price of their salvation. Governors hesitated. Soldiers looked over their shoulders, wondering if the friend beside them might turn traitor. Elaine knew this was coming. She had expected it, but not so soon. At a meeting of the Dominion's High Command, tempers flared. "We should crush them," Admiral Monroe barked. "Make examples of the rebel worlds. Show them what defiance costs." "And drive 100 more systems into their arms?" snapped Director Halloran of the Intelligence Division. "Brute force won't work this time." Marcus Vane stood silently at the end of the room, arms crossed, until Elaine nodded for him to speak. "We built our power on fear," he said. "But fear fades. Memory fades. We need something more." Elaine tilted her head. "Go on." Vane leaned over the holographic map of Dominion space. Red dots marked rebel activity, a slow, spreading cancer. "We don't just retaliate," he said. "We rewrite the war, control the narrative, turn every rebellion into a tragedy, not for us but for them. Make them doubt. Make them regret." Elaine's eyes gleamed. It was ruthless, cold, perfect. Within days, Operation Iron Veil was launched. It started small, news feeds broadcasting stories of rebel attacks killing innocent civilians, images, some real, some carefully edited, of rebel heroes turning on their own people, causing famine, disease, collapse. In a galaxy wired together by information, truth became just another weapon. Rebel movements struggled to hold their support. Whispers spread that perhaps the humans weren't the monsters after all, that maybe, just maybe, life under Dominion rule was better than life in endless chaos. But the resistance wasn't naive. They adapted. Leaders like Eris Kellen, a Lithari war veteran, emerged from the shadows, rallying planets not just with promises of freedom, but with brutal, simple math. Fight now or live forever under the human boot. Under Kellen's leadership, cells merged, resources pooled, plans tightened. The rebels learned from humanity. They grew smarter, harder, and in the dark corners of the galaxy, where no human eyes watched, they began to build weapons humanity hadn't seen before. Weapons born from stolen human tech, twisted by alien hands. For the first time since the fall of the Confederation, humanity faced an enemy that didn't just survive under pressure. They thrived in it. On the Dominion's observation deck, Elaine Carter watched the latest encrypted messages come in, her jaw tight. "They're evolving," Marcus said, reading over her shoulder. Elaine didn't respond immediately. She simply stared into the deep black beyond the glass, where the future waited, bloody and uncertain. "We taught them too well," she murmured at last. And somewhere in the galaxy, hidden by shattered moons and dead suns, the Resistance sharpened its blades, ready to carve its message into the stars. "We endure. We rise. We are coming." The first real battle wasn't fought in space. It was fought on a dead world called Kalor's Reach, a forgotten rock once used for mineral extraction, now little more than ruins and dust storms. But for the rebels, it was the perfect ground. And for humanity, it would become a line they could not afford to lose. General Marcus Vane stood aboard the UHS Resolute, overlooking the scarred surface below. Rebel forces had fortified the ruins, dug tunnels, built hidden gun nests. It was a fortress born from desperation and cunning. Marcus turned to Elaine Carter, who stood beside him, helmet under one arm. "They're daring us to come down," he said grimly. Elaine nodded, her face hard. "Then we'll answer." The invasion began at dawn. Dropships screamed through Kalor's thin atmosphere, unleashing squads of elite human soldiers, the Dominion's finest. They moved like ghosts, cutting through outer defenses, hammering into the rebel lines. But this time, the rebels didn't run. They didn't scatter like frightened animals. They fought. For every trench humanity took, they lost good men and women. For every bunker cleared, 3 more sprang up. The rebels moved with brutal efficiency, using old Confederation tunnels to launch surprise attacks, ambushes, sabotage. By nightfall, the dusty plains ran red with blood, human and alien alike. Elaine stood in the command center, grimacing as casualty reports flooded in. "They've unified," Marcus said, watching the battle unfold on a wall of holographic screens. "Different species, different tactics, but one cause." Elaine exhaled slowly, forcing down the flicker of anger in her chest. "We forced them to find common ground," she said. "We turned enemies into brothers." And now, they were paying the price. Outside, the battle raged with a ferocity that stunned even hardened Dominion veterans. Rebel banners, the Broken Circle and Lightning Bolt, flew defiantly over captured human artillery posts. Old Confederation war machines, resurrected and modified, rolled out of hidden bunkers, blasting apart human positions. For the first time since humanity had risen to dominance, it tasted bitter, undeniable resistance. In the burning ruins of Kalor's central city, Marcus and Elaine personally led the final assault. Blaster fire tore through the smoke-thick air. Soldiers screamed. The ground shook under the roar of ancient tanks and orbital bombardments. Marcus slammed into cover behind a collapsed wall, blood trickling from a gash above his brow. Elaine crouched beside him, pistol drawn. "This isn't just rebellion," he shouted over the chaos. "It's a movement." Elaine's teeth clenched. She fired into the mist, dropping a rebel soldier who had gotten too close. "Then we end it. Here, now." They pushed forward, their soldiers rallying behind them. Street by bloody street, they clawed their way toward the rebel command center, an old mining control tower turned into a fortress. Inside, Aris Kellen waited. The Lithari war leader, scarred and unbowed, stood before a battered console, watching the human advance. He knew the end was near, but it didn't matter. Around him, rebel survivors armed explosive charges, prepared last stands, readied themselves to die. Because victory wasn't measured by survival anymore. It was measured by the memory they would leave behind. As human forces burst into the tower, blasters lighting up the darkness, Kellen activated the final command. Across Kalor's reach, explosives rigged deep underground detonated, not enough to destroy the planet, but enough to bury every human soldier under tons of rubble. Elaine and Marcus barely had time to realize what was happening. "Get out!" Marcus bellowed, shoving soldiers toward the dropships. Elaine grabbed a wounded Marine and dragged him across the shaking ground, heart hammering as towers crumbled and firestorms roared through the streets. Above them, the sky split with desperate evacuation ships trying to escape the inferno. Hours later, orbiting high above the dead, burning world, the cost was clear. Thousands dead. Ships lost. Humanity's illusion of invincibility shattered. Elaine sat in the medbay, blood smeared across her armor, her mind numb with exhaustion. Marcus, face bandaged, stood at her side. "They made their choice," he said, voice rough. Elaine looked up at him, eyes burning. "And so will we." Because Kalor's reach wasn't a defeat. It was a warning. The galaxy wouldn't be ruled by kindness. It would be ruled by fire. And if they wanted war, if they wanted to rise against Earth, humanity would meet them with a fury they had never seen before. No more mercy, no more patience, no more chances. The beast had been awakened once. Now it would never sleep again.